The story begins with a single sound. A bell, slow, heavy, echoing through the stone halls of the palace like a warning no one dares to name. Princess Elizabeth, only 2 years old, wakes to the cold air of morning. She doesn't know why the servants move quietly, or why their faces look pale. She only knows that something in the world has changed, something she cannot understand yet, but will carry for the rest of her life. Down the long corridor, far from her small room, men speak in low voices. Words like treason and execution hang in the air, but the child doesn't know their meaning. All she knows is that her mother, Anne Boleyn, had kissed her forehead the night before and told her she loved her. That was the last time Elizabeth would ever see her. The kingdom will one day tell stories about Anne Boleyn. Some will paint her as a villain, others as a victim. But on this morning, she is simply a mother walking toward her death, and a daughter waking in a world that no longer has room for her. Elizabeth is carried from her room by a nurse with trembling hands. She doesn't understand the look of pity in the woman's eyes. She doesn't understand why no one will say her mother's name. The halls seem different today, colder, darker, as if the very stones know what has happened. Elizabeth looks around as children do, searching for something familiar, but the air feels too still. Every step echoes. Every servant avoids her eyes. The kingdom has shifted in a single moment, and Elizabeth, barely old enough to speak in full sentences, has become a silent symbol of danger. Because she is Anne Boleyn's daughter. Because her mother has just been killed by the crown. Because the child with red gold hair now carries the shadow of a fallen queen. In the days that follow, Elizabeth is moved to a smaller household, far from court. Her title changes, her clothes change. Her future is suddenly a blank space, filled not with promise, but with fear and uncertainty. She is too young to know why the world feels different. But she notices things. She notices how adults whisper when she enters a room. She notices how some refuse to look at her. She notices how her name, once spoken with warmth, is now said with caution. Elizabeth is not treated with cruelty, not in the open, but she can feel the coldness around her, the careful smiles, the stiff posture, the way people speak to her as if they're afraid of what might happen if they show kindness. She is only a child, yet she senses a strange truth. The kingdom does not know what to do with her. The court that once celebrated her birth now treats her like a reminder of a painful mistake. Her mother had risen too fast, loved too boldly, challenged too many, and in the end, the same people who raised her up had torn her down with frightening speed. And now they look at Elizabeth with the same fear. After all, she carries her mother's blood, her mother's eyes, her mother's fierce spirit, even if it is still asleep inside her. Some courtiers whisper that she will grow into a threat. Others whisper that she will vanish from history. No one whispers that she will one day become a queen. For now, she is simply a young girl walking through the ashes of a world that wanted her, then rejected her, all before she learned to read. Elizabeth's childhood becomes a quiet study in survival. She learns early not to ask questions. She learns to sit still at the table, hands folded neatly, eyes lowered. She learns to watch people, their smiles, their silences, their sudden changes in tone. She listens more than she speaks, because when she speaks, people listen too closely. She feels the pressure of invisible eyes, the weight of expectations and fears she does not yet understand. She wonders why adults tense up when she laughs. She wonders why some guard their words when she enters a room. She wonders why her mother's name is never spoken aloud. Every night she lies in her small bed and wonders if this is her fault. She wonders if she did something wrong, if she cried too loudly, if she smiled too brightly, if she somehow caused the sorrow in the household. No one explains it to her. No one tells her who her mother truly was. No one tells her why the world changed after that cold morning. She grows up inside a mystery, one shaped by silence, fear, and half-hidden truths. As Elizabeth becomes older, even by just a few years, she notices something else. Something deeper. Something unsettling. Whenever she walks through the palace courtyard on the rare days she is allowed to visit, people look at her with a strange expression, a mix of curiosity and caution, like she is a ghost from a story they want to forget but cannot escape. Some nod politely, some bow stiffly, but others turn away, pretending not to see her. It is then she senses the truth. The kingdom fears her, or fears what she represents, because she is living proof of a powerful man's rage. She is the child of a queen destroyed by the very throne she once sat beside. And she is the reminder, quiet, observant, growing stronger each year, that history does not bury its mistakes easily. Elizabeth feels the coldness, but she does not let it break her. She carries it. She studies it. She learns from it. The loneliness shapes her. The whispers sharpen her. The silence becomes her teacher. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice begins to grow. A voice that wonders, if her mother was destroyed by this kingdom, what will it try to do to her? Elizabeth does not know the answer yet. She only knows the question. And that question follows her like a shadow, quiet, patient, and dark. But there is something else, too. Something gentle, something dangerous in its own way. Hope, a flicker of it, a spark, a tiny, unbreakable flame inside the child the world tries to erase. Elizabeth senses that her story is only beginning, that somehow, in some distant future, she will need to face the kingdom that fears her. But for now, she is just a child standing in the ruins of her mother's fall, wondering how she will survive in a world built to destroy her. It begins with a sound Elizabeth knows too well. A door closing softly behind her. Not slammed, not forced, just closed, in that slow, careful way adults use when they're hiding something from a child. Elizabeth, now a little older, watches the door for a moment. She waits. She listens. She tries to understand the silence left behind. It is the same silence she has known since the day her mother was taken from the world. A silence that seems to follow her everywhere she goes. The people around her don't speak of Anne Boleyn, not directly. They pretend the past is gone, buried under cold stone and colder decisions. But the past moves with Elizabeth. It breathes around her like a ghost that refuses to fade. Some children grow up surrounded by love. Elizabeth grows up surrounded by shadows. Her life takes place in the corners of rooms, in the pauses between conversations, in the brief moments when adults forget she is listening. She hears the words they try to hide. Traitor's daughter, dangerous blood, just like her mother. They think she doesn't understand. But she does. She understands their tone, their stiff posture, the sharpness in their eyes when she asks too many questions. She understands the fear behind their warnings, the way they cut their sentences short when she walks into a room. Elizabeth is learning young that people fear what they do not control. And they fear her. To survive, Elizabeth develops little habits, quiet habits, invisible ones. She moves gently so no one can accuse her of disruption. She listens twice before speaking once. She studies faces the way others study books, reading every twitch, every pause, every hidden message. She watches adults argue through closed doors. She watches servants trade stories behind their hands. She watches her own future shrink and stretch with every rumor. Elizabeth becomes a child who sees everything and says almost nothing. In her lessons, she learns quickly, too quickly for some. Her sharp mind makes certain tutors uncomfortable. They admire her intelligence, but it scares them too. People with quick thoughts often change kingdoms, and this kingdom has learned to fear change. Still, Elizabeth keeps learning. She reads when she's allowed. She memorizes when she's not. She copies letters by candlelight, her small hand steady even as the wax drips beside her. Books become her shelter. Stories become her secret world. Knowledge becomes the armor she cannot yet wear but will one day need. Her mother, Anne, had been clever too. Clever enough to rise, clever enough to be feared, clever enough to be destroyed for it. People whisper that Elizabeth has the same fire in her blood. They whisper that her eyes hold the same spark. She hears these things through cracked doors and thin walls. She tucks them into her heart like warnings. At night, when the candles burn low and the house falls quiet, Elizabeth feels the ghost of her mother most clearly. Not in a frightening way, but as a presence, a pull, a story unfinished. She imagines Anne standing at her bedside, whispering strength into her bones. She imagines that the fire people fear in her is a gift, not a curse, a small piece of her mother that survived the fall. Elizabeth never saw Anne walk to her death, but sometimes she dreams of her, a woman dressed in black velvet, head held high, eyes steady, even as the world turned against her. And in those dreams, Elizabeth learned something. Her mother may be gone, but she is not lost. She lives on in the daughter who survived her. Still, the world around Elizabeth is dangerous. Every small mistake can be twisted. Every kind gesture can be misread. One wrong word, one wrong friend, one wrong moment, and she could be pushed aside forever. Some already want to see her vanish quietly into the edges of history. Others watch her with curiosity, almost hope, as if she might become something more. Elizabeth can feel the tension rising, not in loud ways, but in the soft, uneasy ways history often begins. A letter held a moment too long, a servant bowing a little deeper, a noble staring at her as if seeing someone else's ghost. People are beginning to notice her again, not as the motherless child, not as the traitor's daughter, but as the girl with bright eyes and a mind that refuses to bend. The kingdom is shifting, and she can feel the ground beneath her starting to tremble. One afternoon, Elizabeth stands alone in the courtyard. The wind moves across the stones, lifting her hair as she looks up at the sky. She is older now, not quite grown, not quite sheltered. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are sharp. Her heart is quiet but strong. A group of servants pass by. Their voices drop as they notice her. She hears one whisper, "She looks like her." The other replies, "God help us." Elizabeth doesn't react. She stands still, letting their fear wash over her. She knows what they mean. She knows who they see when they look at her. But this time, something inside her does not shrink. It rises, slowly, quietly, like a flame waking after years in the dark. She realizes she is done being afraid of her own shadow, done apologizing for her mother's fall, done living as if she is the mistake the kingdom wants to forget. She is Anne Boleyn's daughter, but she's also herself, and the world, whether ready or not, is starting to see her. As night falls, Elizabeth returns to her room. She closes the door gently, the same soft sound that once filled her with dread. But now it feels different. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. She sits by the window and watches the moonlight stretch across the floor. It looks like a path, a thin, bright path cutting through the dark. For the first time in her life, she wonders if she might follow it someday. The kingdom is watching her again, not kindly, not cruelly, but closely. History rarely looks away from a child born in fire, and even if she does not know it yet, Elizabeth is no longer just surviving. She is changing, growing, becoming. The ghosts that raised her have shaped her into something powerful, something steady, something the world cannot fully predict. Soon she will have to face the kingdom that killed her mother. But tonight, she simply breathes and lets the wind carry the truth she is finally ready to feel. She was never meant to disappear. She was meant to endure. The moment begins with a breath of dust, a thin gray cloud drifting into a sunlit room as Elizabeth pulls open an old wooden chest. The hinges groan softly like they've been sleeping for years. Maybe they have. Maybe the truth inside them has been waiting for her. Patient, quiet, almost afraid. Elizabeth kneels beside the chest. She is older now, no longer the frightened child who moved like a shadow through the halls, but she still carries the weight of silence on her shoulders, the silence of a kingdom that never speaks her mother's name. The room is still. The air feels heavy, as if the walls know what she is about to find. Her hand brushes the edge of faded fabric. A gown, a small prayer book, a ring wrapped in cloth, and beneath it all, a letter, yellowed, folded, hidden under years of fear. Elizabeth freezes. The world seems to stop with her. For once in her life, she doesn't feel watched, she doesn't feel studied, she doesn't feel judged. She feels called, as if history has inhaled deeply and is waiting, holding its breath, for what she will do next. Elizabeth lifts the letter with careful fingers. The parchment is fragile, like it could crumble at any moment. She unfolds it slowly, afraid of tearing something sacred. The handwriting is messy, rushed, but she knows without question whose hand created it. Her mother's. Anne Boleyn, the woman the kingdom tried to erase. The queen who walked to her death with her head held high. The mother Elizabeth barely remembers, yet carries inside her every day. Elizabeth's throat tightens. She almost stops reading, almost closes the letter and hides it away again, the way so many others have done. But something inside her refuses to stay silent anymore. She takes a breath and begins. The words are simple, soft, written by someone who knew time was running out. Her mother writes of love, not loud love, not passionate love, but the quiet love a mother feels when she knows she cannot protect her child. Anne writes of fear, but also of hope. She writes of mistakes she made. She writes of the courage she wishes she'd had sooner. She writes of the world she wanted her daughter to grow in, but knew she wouldn't live to see. Elizabeth reads each line slowly. Her heartbeat echoes in her ears, steady but heavy. Some sentences are shaky, as if Anne's hand trembled while writing. Others are strong, written with the force of someone who refuses to let her story be twisted by others. Elizabeth understands for the first time that her mother was not a legend or a villain or a rumor. She was a woman, a human being, a mother who wrote her last thoughts with a breaking heart and unbroken faith. The letter does not speak of regret in the way people expect. It does not curse the king. It does not cry out against fate. Instead, Anne writes of her daughter's future, a future she believes can still shine, even in the darkest hours. "I pray you will grow into the woman you are meant to be," Anne writes, her words thin but steady. "Strong, wise, kind. Do not let the world shape you into its fear." Elizabeth stops reading. Those words settle into her chest like warm embers. She reads them again and again. She feels something inside her shift, gently at first, like a curtain being drawn back, then stronger, like a storm rolling across the sea. All her life, people told her who she was. A child of shame, a mistake, a threat. But here, in her hands, is the truth from the one person whose voice has been missing all her life. Her mother believed in her, not as a symbol, not as a shadow, but as a daughter. Elizabeth closes her eyes. She lets the moment settle into her bones. She tries to imagine Anne writing this letter in a dim cell, knowing she had only hours left. She imagines her mother's hands shaking. She imagines her breath steadying as she wrote her last message of love. And she imagines the final moment, the moment her mother folded the letter, tucked it away, and hoped someone kind would keep it safe. Elizabeth opens her eyes. This is not just a letter. It is a lifeline, a spark, a piece of truth that has survived against all odds. For the first time, Elizabeth feels the presence of her mother not as a ghost, but as a force. A guide, a voice that the kingdom tried to bury but could not silence. She stands, the letter pressed to her chest. The room seems brighter now. The dust in the air glows like tiny stars. The silence feels different, not cold, but sacred. Elizabeth walks to the window. Outside, the world is wide and strange, full of the same danger she has always sensed. But something has changed, something important. She knows who she is now. She knows who she comes from. She knows what lives inside her. A legacy not of scandal, but of strength. Not of fear, but of fire. Not of shame, but of survival. Elizabeth has been hiding her whole life, hiding from whispers, hiding from shadows, hiding from the truth of her own blood. But holding her mother's words, she realizes that hiding is no longer living. Anne did not walk to her death so her daughter could live on her knees. She did it so her daughter could rise. Elizabeth folds the letter carefully and places it against her heart. She closes the chest, not to forget, but to protect. She knows now that her past is not her weakness. It is her foundation. The room feels smaller than it did an hour ago. She feels too big for it now, like her heart has outgrown the space where fear once lived. Elizabeth steps into the hallway. The floor creaks beneath her feet. The air feels cooler, lighter. She moves with a quiet certainty she has never felt before. She does not need to raise her voice. She does not need to shout. Her change is silent but powerful, like dawn breaking across a dark sky. She walks forward. Each step is a decision. Each breath is a promise. She is no longer the girl hiding behind the shadow of a fallen queen. She is the young woman carrying that queen's final truth. A truth that breathed for the first time in years when Elizabeth opened that letter. A truth that now breathes inside her. And as she walks, she knows. Her story is no longer controlled by fear. Her future is no longer shaped by whispers. Her name is no longer a warning. It is a beginning. A quiet beginning, but one strong enough to change a kingdom. A cold wind moves through the old stone halls, carrying the faint echo of a crown being lifted from a velvet cushion. Not placed yet, just lifted, as if the kingdom itself is holding its breath. This is the moment history remembers. But to understand its weight, you have to imagine the quiet behind it. The years of shadows, The years when Elizabeth Tudor walked the world like someone only half allowed to exist. Because before the gold touched her hair, she was simply a girl trying not to disappear. She grew up in a world that kept reminding her of what had been taken. Her mother's name was never spoken in soft tones. It was whispered like a warning. A traitor's daughter, a cursed child, a reminder of a queen who died too boldly. But here, in this moment, the halls that once feared her blood now prepare to kneel to it. The story of how she reached this point doesn't begin on a throne. It begins in the quiet corners where she hid her fear, where she learned to survive with careful eyes and silent steps. Elizabeth learned early that trust was a luxury she could not afford. She watched adults change with the seasons, smiles turning to suspicion, promises fading into danger. Even those who cared for her did so with a kind of nervous distance, as if loving her too openly might draw the wrong gaze. She walked through life like a candle shielding its flame from the wind. There were plots, whispers, accusations that rose around her like a tide she had no power to stop. At any moment she could be pulled under, and more than once she almost was. But she kept standing, not because she felt strong, but because she didn't know how to bow. Time carried her into adulthood like a river that refused to let her drown. She grew sharper, steadier, harder to break. People began to see something in her eyes, something calm, something dangerous in its silence, a kind of patience that belonged to someone who had nothing left to fear. She had learned to stay alive in the cracks between kingdoms. She had learned to read a room faster than most people breathed. She had learned what it meant to be hunted and what it meant to refuse to run. And slowly, almost quietly, the world began to shift. When her sister Mary took the throne, the court changed again. Tension thickened the air. The kingdom trembled under new storms: religion, loyalty, rebellion. Elizabeth stood in the center of it all, trying not to be noticed, yet constantly surrounded by suspicion. There were moments when the prison walls closed around her, moments when she wondered if her mother had felt the same cold touch on her skin. But history bent. The storm passed. And when Queen Mary died, the world suddenly opened, like a locked door finally turning on its hinge. The people looked to Elizabeth, not because she was the safest choice, but because she was the last steady flame still burning. And so we return to the hall. The crown waits in the hands of the Archbishop. The air feels thick, almost holy, almost haunted. Elizabeth's steps are calm as she walks forward, but inside her chest, memories move like ghosts. She remembers being called illegitimate. She remembers the tower walls. She remembers reading her mother's words again and again, tracing each one with her fingertip as if touching a life she never got to know. She remembers surviving, not gracefully but stubbornly. She kneels. The crown lowers, and for a heartbeat the world is silent. When it touches her head, everything changes. The girl who once hid in corners rises taller than the walls that once tried to contain her. She becomes Queen Elizabeth III. From the very beginning, she rules with a mind shaped by pain and a heart shaped by loss. She listens more than she speaks. She watches more than she acts. She avoids the traps that destroyed the people before her, not because she is perfect, but because she understands how quickly a fall can come. The court tries to push her toward marriage, toward alliances, toward choices that would strip her of the control she fought so hard to claim. But she refuses. Not loudly, not angrily, just quietly, like someone protecting something fragile and precious inside herself. Her childhood taught her that power handed to the wrong person becomes a weapon, and she would never place her life or her kingdom into the wrong hands again. So she rules alone, not as a warning, but as a promise. No one will decide my fate but me. The kingdom changes under her. Slowly, like winter turning to spring, trade grows, peace holds, art returns. The people who once doubted her now speak her name with pride. But even then, even at the height of her glory, she carries her mother's shadow with her. Not as a wound, as a reminder. Anne Boleyn never had the chance to see the world she dreamed of for her daughter. But Elizabeth carried that dream like a hidden ember, keeping it warm through the darkest nights. And now, it lights the crown she wears. Near the end of this chapter, we see her alone in a small room, late at night. A candle flickers beside her. The golden crown rests on a table, its metal catching the soft glow. She holds the letter, her mother's letter, the one she discovered years before. The paper is fragile, edges worn from a lifetime of being handled. She reads it again, but this time the words feel different. They are no longer the last hopes of a doomed queen. They are no longer the wishes of a mother she barely knew. Tonight, they feel like a whisper across time, a whisper saying, "You made it." Elizabeth closes her eyes. For a moment, she lets the memory of Anne Boleyn rest beside her, not as a tragedy, not as a curse, but as a quiet presence woven into her ribs. The same kingdom that killed her mother now bows to her, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They see what she became. A queen built not from privilege, but from survival. As the candle burns lower, Elizabeth places the letter gently back into its box. She touches the crown with the back of her fingers, almost like a goodbye, almost like a promise. And in the soft glow of that room, surrounded by silence and shadows, something becomes clear. Her life was never just about rising. It was about remembering. Remembering the ghosts that shaped her. Remembering the girl who learned to watch in silence. Remembering the mother who loved her from a distance she could never cross. Elizabeth breathes in, steady and calm. A throne for the lost has finally found its queen.